Alright, we are continuing with the integumentary system, and in this video we are going to talk about accessory structures of the skin. So accessory structures of the skin include the hair, nails, sweat glands, and sebaceous glands, also known as oil glands. So here's our image of that structure of the skin again. And so you can see those sebaceous or oil glands are next to and anchored into the hair follicles. We've got those hair follicles down in the dermis and then projecting up through the dermis and epidermis. Here we have an aerocrine sweat gland right here, and we've got that duct that's going to come out through the epidermis as well, through that pore. And then we have this erector pili muscle. We'll talk a little bit about that. So those are the structures of skin, and we'll see an image of a nail when we get to that section. So the functions of hair are partially for protection, so it is going to help protect from certain mechanical damage, from like touch and pressure and stuff like that. It's also going to be involved in sensory input, thermoregulation, and even communication. So here's that basic structure of hair, and so we can see we've got that hair follicle anchored down here in the dermis and even hypodermis layer. So here is a dermal papilla that's projecting up and anchoring into the bottom of that hair follicle. But hair is a keratin filament growing out of that epidermis. It's primarily made of dead keratinized cells, just like that epidermis, that outer layer of the epidermis is. They're just oriented in a different pattern, and also is in that different structure overall. And so we've got that hair follicle in the dermis. We've got a hair shaft down here. So we've got that hair shaft. This is part of the hair, but not anchored into the follicle. Much of this is exposed to the skin surface, so we've got it all the way down through here, but most of what we're seeing is up here projecting out through the skin surface. The rest of the hair anchored into the follicle, we're not seeing. That's the root of the hair. This is very, very deep down in the dermis, as you can see at the hair bulb, which is that base part of our hair follicles. The hair bulb is going to include a layer of active basal cells called the hair matrix, and these are cells that are undergoing mitosis pretty consistently. And this hair bulb is surrounding the hair papilla, made out of connective tissue, and also contains capillaries and nerve endings from the dermis. So this is how our hair functions partially with this sensory input, is that they are connected in with nerves. Thought I had another slide on that, but that's okay. We'll stay with this one for now. And so that basal layer, the epidermis, just like it helps push those cells out as they die and shed off, the basal cells of that hair bulb are going to continually divide and keep pushing those cells outwards, which is how that hair grows in length. And so we have some different layers of that hair shaft right here that we can see outlined right here: the medulla, cortex, and cuticle. So the medulla is the central core of the hair that's surrounded by that cortex. This is a layer of compressed keratinized cells, and then that is further covered in another layer of very, very hard keratinized cells known as the cuticle. All right. And so these can be depicted in some different cross sections, but important thing to note is that not all hair has a medullary layer. And so you can see that medulla is disappearing as that hair gets longer and longer. All right. So this hair texture, so whether you have straight, wavy, or curly hair, this is determined by the shape and structure of the cortex layer, and how thick that medulla is and whether or not it's present. All right, so shape and structure of those layers are determining hair texture, and those are determined by the shape of the hair follicle. So this is a genetic thing, so hair follicles in people with different textures of hair are going to be a little bit different based on those genetics. And this is also why certain changes, like pregnancy, is pretty well known to change hair texture, because it can ultimately affect that hair follicle. Alright, so as we're growing our hair, there's some different phases of hair growth. So hair, just like our skin cells, is going to grow and then eventually shed and get replaced by new hair. So hair growth occurs in 3 phases. Anagen is the first phase. Cells are dividing rapidly in that hair root, which is going to push the shaft of the hair up and out, lengthening the hair. The length of the anagen phase is usually measured in years. And typically this is going to be about 2 to 7 years. So this is a very, very long phase. Next up is the catagen phase. This is only going to last for a few weeks. And this is the transition of the hair follicle from active growth that's going to start slowing down. And then we're going to end in the telogen phase, and this is when the hair follicle is at rest and no new growth is occurring. This phase can last about 2 to 4 months, and at the end of that phase, another anagen phase will begin and start pushing that hair out again in length. All right, so those basal cells are really, really active for up to several years, and then they really slow down and then halt their growth and then restart again after a certain period of time. All right, hair is typically going to grow about 0.3 millimeters per day during the anagen phase, which is not a lot. Some people have hair that grows a little bit faster than that, like I do. Other people's hair is going to grow a little bit slower than that. It's all based on genetics. On average, humans lose about 50 hairs a day, and then they get replaced with the hair follicle starting in that anagen phase again. And then hair loss is going to occur when hair is spending more time than it should in that telogen phase, or that anagen phase is being cut short and then progressing really quickly to that telogen phase where no new growth is occurring, which can lead to a lot of hair shedding if that telogen phase is not restarting with that next anagen phase. It's a lot more complicated than that, but we're not gonna get into all those details here. But hair loss is when there's more hair shedding than what is being replaced, so there's usually some sort of issue with that anagen phase. That can happen due to a variety of factors like hormone changes, dietary changes, the aging process, stuff like that. Among many, many, many other things. Even illnesses are pretty well known to temporarily halt the anagen phase and can cause some hair loss over a couple of months after severe illnesses. Alright, next up we will talk about nails. So the nails of our fingers, these are an evolutionary change from the claws of a lot of our closest living relatives. And so nails are basically adapted claws to be much, much shorter and to cover the tips of the fingers a little bit differently than claws would. So nails are going to help protect the tips of our fingers and toes because those are the furthest extremities and the parts of the body that are going to experience the most mechanical stress. So a lot of physical damage is happening to the fingertips and toes. And the nails are also going to form a lot of support for picking up smaller objects because without that hard structural support, it can actually be really difficult for our fingers to function properly the way they're supposed to. And much like our hair, our nails are composed of densely packed keratinocytes. They're just oriented in a different pattern instead of having that hair structure and having that more filamentous structure, we're going to have more of a flat sheet of those keratinocytes for the nails. So, we all know what nails look like from the outside, but we'll take a look over here at the internal structure. So we have the free edge of the nail. This is the part that you're going to be trimming periodically or filing down. So that is entirely dead keratinized cells. Obviously there's nothing connected to that, like nerves or anything. Otherwise it would really hurt to cut the free edge. The nail itself is the rest of the structure that is anchored into the nail bed. And then we've got lateral nail folds on the sides. The laluna is that kind of crescent moon shaped white area at the base of the nail. The epinicum is also known as the cuticle, and then we've also got the proximal nail fold down there, just a little bit closer to the body than that epinicum. Right. Again, under that nail, we have the nail bed, and then we've also got a nail root down here. We can see one of the phalanx bones right here. This is going to be a distal phalanx. And then we've got that epidermis and dermis layer. Underneath the nail is the hyponicum. This is a part that's going to hurt a lot if you accidentally cut that while trimming your nails. I'm sure we've all done that at some point in time. We're not getting into glands yet. So that nail body is formed on that nail bed underneath here. That's going to have a lot of vessels, different types of cells down there, as well as some nerves in that structure, and again help protect the tips of fingers and toes. So that nail root that we are seeing right down here, similar to a hair root, this is that base structure where we are getting a lot of that proliferation of the basal cells that are going to undergo mitosis constantly. And as they're dividing and making new copies, they're pushing that nail out continuously and having that nail grow in length, forming that free edge out there that we do trim. So that nail root functions very, very similarly to the root of hair. Those lateral nail folds are kind of overlaying the sides and helping to anchor the nail into that nail bed and keep it attached to the finger. And then we've got that cuticle and proximal nail fold also helping to protect and anchor that nail in, keep them protected. So that nail bed, again, very, very rich in blood vessels, which is why the beds of our nails appear pink, because there's a lot of blood flow to that area, except at that base where we have that laluna, which means little moon, and that is not going to have as much blood flow to it, which is why it appears much more pale in color. And then we've got that layer underneath the nail. That's a very, very thick layer of the stratum corneum, but obviously there's some nerve sensation in there because if you cut your nails too short, it's going to hurt a lot. And that brings us to glands. So sweat glands produce sweat, and sweat helps cool us down. We have two types of sweat glands, aerocrine sweat glands and apocrine sweat glands. So aerocrine sweat glands are going to produce a type of sweat called hypotonic sweat. This is used for thermoregulation, so helping to regulate our body temperature. So this is the type of sweat that we're doing when we get really, really hot in the summertime and warmer months and start sweating to cool down. There are tons and tons of these sweat glands on the palms of the hand and soles of the feet, among other areas of the body. Apocrine sweat glands, these are usually going to be associated with hair follicles, just like our sebaceous glands are. The sweat from apocrine sweat glands have some compounds that make it a little bit thicker and also subject to bacterial decomposition, so breakdown of bacteria that naturally live on our skin. And that is where body odor smell comes from, is that bacteria breaking down over time. So Those are our sweat glands, and then we have those sebaceous or oil glands. They release something called sebum, which is what we call oil. And this is going to help lubricate that stratum corneum layer and keep our skin from getting super dried out, which makes it very fragile and much more prone to a lot of damage, cracking, bleeding, stuff like that. Those aerocrine sweat glands, again, that's going to be produced for that thermoregulation. This type of sweat is released by exocytosis. So this is going to be made mostly of water with a little bit of salt and some other compounds in it, including antimicrobial peptides. So those are really important, even though we tend to hate those because nobody likes to sweat too much. And then those apocrine sweat glands are ones that are going to produce sweat constantly all day long, and you're just not noticing that sweat being produced because this is just normal water loss that the body undergoes. So this is sweat that's going to have that water and some salts along with those thickening agents. And so the release of the sweat is under control of both the nervous system and endocrine system. And this is playing a role in the human pheromone response, and we don't really know a whole lot about that response at this point in time. There's ongoing research into it, but we have realized that these sweat glands play a role in that. So commercial antiperspirants usually use aluminum-based compounds to stop sweat, because when that aluminum compound enters the sweat glands, those ducts, then the compound is going to form a precipitate. If you've taken chemistry, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but that's a solidifying agent, and it's forming that because of a change in pH. And that actually forms a physical blockade in the sweat duct, preventing sweat from coming out of the pores, which is why it's really hard to get a natural antiperspirant, but natural deodorants, which are just tackling odor, those function differently, but they are not going to block those sweat glands. Our oil glands, again, really important. We do need to lubricate the skin. That is in our best interest. That also helps waterproofing the skin. These are usually linked to hair follicles as well. Sebum is a mixture of different types of lipids. And again, if we don't have that lubrication for our skin, then it is going to get dry and it's going to start to crack and bleed and cause all sorts of issues that can lead to being more prone to infections and stuff like that. So it's really important to have these sebaceous glands, even though a lot of us really dislike those because they can get clogged and cause acne. So the fatty acids of sebum do have some antibacterial properties and help prevent some water loss when it's really dry or hot out. But the production of this oil is caused by hormones, which is why it's usually not going to activate until puberty starts. But these glands are relatively inactive during childhood. They are producing enough oil to help keep the skin moisturized and protected and stuff like that, but it's not going to be excessive. And we will continue our next video talking about functions of the integumentary system.